Greetings. In this episode, I will talk about the epidemics mentioned in the Bible. Descriptions of various diseases appear repeatedly in the Bible, indicating that the Jewish people had to encounter different epidemics throughout their history. I will discuss some of them in this video. One of the earliest mentions of epidemics can be found in the book of Exodus, which describes the exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt to the land of Canaan. Pharaoh did not want to release the Hebrews from Egypt, and Moses predicted that Egypt would be punished with various plagues if Pharaoh did not change his mind and let God's people go. These plagues are commonly referred to as the 10 plagues of Egypt. The Bible mentions a total of 10 plagues that struck Egypt: the turning of water into blood, an invasion of frogs, then gnats, punishment by flies, a livestock disease, boils and sores, thunder, lightning, and fiery hail, a locust invasion, darkness over Egypt, and finally, the death of the firstborn. Modern researchers have analyzed these accounts and concluded that the plagues represented catastrophic events well known to ancient Egyptians and mentioned in Egyptian documents. The 10th plague is particularly interesting, where Moses predicted that as punishment for enslaving the Israelites, God would destroy all the firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's firstborn to the firstborn of the slave woman, as well as all the firstborn of the livestock. This would lead the Egyptians to beg the Israelites to leave Egypt. And this prediction came true. At midnight, death began to strike all the firstborn in Egypt, and terror gripped the entire country. However, the homes of the Israelites, whose doors were marked with the blood of Passover lambs, were spared. That night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and urged them to lead the Israelites and their livestock out of Egypt without setting any conditions. This description suggests that it might have been an epidemic causing a large number of deaths. However, modern research refutes this assumption. It indicates a phenomenon common not only to Egypt, but also to other countries of that time, occurring repeatedly. The numerous deaths are explained by the contamination of the top layer of grain with toxins from a fungus known as black mold. This contamination could have come from water or the excrement of locusts. The death of the firstborn specifically can be explained by the Egyptian tradition where the eldest sons were the first to eat in the family, receiving a double portion. Similarly, the livestock, the strongest eldest animal, would be the first to reach the trough. The firstborn were the first to be poisoned, receiving a double portion from the top, contaminated grain supplies. The Hebrews were not affected by this plague because they lived away from the major Egyptian cities and had independent food supplies. Moreover, they were shepherds rather than farmers, so a significant part of their diet consisted of meat and milk rather than grain, unlike the Egyptians. The next account of an epidemic is found in the first book of Samuel, which describes the history of the Jewish people from the birth of the prophet Samuel to the death of Judah's first king, Saul. This book contains many stories about the conflicts between the Hebrews and the Philistines, who at one point subjugated almost all the tribes of Israel. We are particularly interested in the episode that discusses the Jews' attempt to revolt under the high priest Eli. After one defeat, the Jews decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant, their most sacred relic, to the battlefield. However, even then, the Philistines won. The most devastating blow was that the Philistines captured the sacred Ark of the Covenant. The Bible describes how the Philistines took the ark to their city, Ashdod, and placed it in the temple of their chief god, Dagon. But soon, an epidemic of an unknown disease broke out in the city, and many mice appeared in the fields. destroying the crops. The frightened inhabitants of Ashdod moved the ark to the city of Gath, and then to Ashkelon. But in each of these cities epidemics began. The rulers of all 5 Philistine cities, united in an alliance, gathered in this city and decided to return the ark to the Israelites, realizing that this was the only way to prevent the spread of the disease. Along with the ark, they sent atonement gifts, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, corresponding to the number of Philistine cities. They placed the ark and the gifts on a cart pulled by cows, which, without any guidance, brought the cart to the camp of the Jews. It is possible that this passage describes an epidemic of bubonic plague, which is accompanied by painful swellings, buboes. The mention of a mouse infestation might not be coincidental either. As is well known, one of the most likely carriers of the plague was rats, and the passage might actually refer to a rat infestation. The next account of an epidemic is found in the 2nd book of Kings. It details the history of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah up until their conquest by the Assyrian and Babylonian kings. It is known that in 978 B.C., the unified Hebrew state split into 2, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. In 722 B.C., Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, who relocated its inhabitants to Media. Relocation was a common policy for the Assyrians, who were constantly at war and losing their population. After each successful war, the population of the conquered province was relocated. Deprived of their roots, the relocated inhabitants quickly assimilated and became Assyrians. Similarly, the inhabitants of Israel were assimilated and were forever lost to Judaism. A similar fate threatened the inhabitants of Judah. In 701 B.C., the Assyrian king Sennacherib, 681 B.C., invaded Judah with a vast army, devastated several cities, and approached Jerusalem. The Judean king Hezekiah paid a large tribute to the Assyrians, even taking items from the temple to do so. However, the Assyrians did not leave, but continued the siege. According to the Bible, God punished the invaders. In the Assyrian camp, 185,000 soldiers fell, and Sennacherib was forced to return to Nineveh. This episode can only be interpreted as a description of some unknown deadly epidemic. Some researchers believe, however, that the Assyrians simply collected the tribute and lifted the siege, satisfied with what they had received. This explanation seems flawed to me. At that time, Assyria had reached the peak of its power, had no rivals, and Judah's ally, Egypt, had been defeated by Assyria. A glance at the map shows Judah alone in the midst of a solid mass of Assyrian territories. All other small states that existed, thanks to the rivalry between great powers, had been conquered by then. I see no motive for the Assyrians not to annex Judah and settle for a ransom. Only an extraordinary event, such as the described epidemic, could have saved Judah. I cannot vouch for the accuracy of the death toll, and the lack of information has prevented researchers from determining the exact diagnosis. Still, the logic of events leads to the conclusion that Judah remained unconquered only because of some epidemic. However, in 586 B.C., Judah was conquered, this time by Babylon, and its inhabitants, like those of Israel, were relocated to Babylonia. But this captivity was short-lived. In 539 B.C., the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Babylonia and allowed the Jews to return to their homeland. Thanks to this, the Jews were able to preserve their national and religious identity. Many researchers note that some epidemics have significantly changed the course of human history, and I will definitely mention this in future episodes. However, I believe that this particular epidemic most radically changed the fate of the world. Imagine for a second a parallel reality where this epidemic did not occur. The Assyrians would have taken Jerusalem and exiled all the Jews who would have been assimilated like the inhabitants of Israel. The only people who upheld monotheism would have ceased to exist, and Christianity would not have emerged. After all, Christ lived in Palestine within the Jewish context, and Christianity without its Jewish foundation is unimaginable. Our civilization would have been completely different since, fundamentally, European civilization is based on Christianity and is permeated by the Christian spirit. Even when secularized, it has remained Christian. This is why I included the story of biblical epidemics in this series, despite the fact that the information reported in the Bible about epidemics is extremely sparse, fragmentary, and often legendary. So, the story of the mass diseases mentioned in the Bible is complete. Goodbye.